We're here in the Talk About Topeka studios, and we've got Doug Dunton and Brian Short here, and they're telling us about ham radios. I wasn't really familiar with this, and we're going to find out about this today. Some really fun toys we have here in the studio with us. Doug, Brian, welcome aboard.
Nice to be here.
Okay, so you brought all these props. You told me you were going to bring props into the studio, and I was like, okay, this is cool. This is looking like some James Bond stuff here.
It really does. And you know what's interesting is that ham radio is alive and well, although many people think that it's gone for another era. It is still being developed, and as you can see, there's all kinds of interesting little gadgets there, even down to a Raspberry Pi that we use to communicate. And that's what ham radio is all about. It's just really communicating with other people and using technology to do it. The interesting thing about ham radio that's different than your cell phone or any of those types of technologies is that we can talk all the way around the world with nothing in between. So we take a little radio, a piece of wire, and a battery, and we can talk literally all the way around the world with no other infrastructure in between.
That's cool. So typically, on my cell phone, we're talking via an antenna, goes to a satellite, goes to another satellite, or however it's doing that. But you guys are able to do this without. I would love to find out about this. Tell me how this works.
So you've got a lot of points of failure in the cell network, whereas we're just going through the atmosphere. One of the things that I often, when I'm teaching classes, I'll ask kids say, well, why wouldn't I just use a phone to make that same communication? I make a call right away. I said, well, how would you ever make communication with someone in Russia? How would you ever strike up that conversation? You're going to open your phone book and find the number for the guy in Russia and call him? And if so, is he going to start talking to you? How does that work, right? Well, on ham radio, one of the things, there are protocols set up so that you can just get on a radio and put your call sign out there and talk to people literally all over the world.
Wow, that's really cool. So, and a lot of people, once they find out about this, I'm sure they kind of get bitten by a bug. Like, they don't know about it, and then they learn about it, and then it's like, this is pretty cool to understand how all of this works, right?
My favorite thing is they say, teach your kids ham radio, and they'll never have money for drugs because they'll have spent all their money on the toys. As you can see, we've got quite a few samples here, and this is just the tiniest of samples. Literally, radios now, thanks to some of the marketing from the Chinese, can be as inexpensive as $30. So you can get started for $30, but there are also radios out there that are $15,000. So it's just like fishing, if you can spend $10 on a fishing pole and go fishing and be happy, or you can spend $30,000 on a bass boat and maybe that's what you need to be happy. And there are all those same levels in ham radio.
So if we wanted to talk to Russia here in this room, what do we have to do? What equipment do we need? What are we looking at?
Right, so you need a radio, and the radios again range a couple $100 for what we call an HF radio. Their frequency range is very similar to what your car radio is, your AM radio in your car. So it's much lower in frequency than your FM. And then you would just literally need a piece of wire. This time of day and when it's sunny outside, the radio waves are really in our favor. You take a couple pieces of wire, put them out the window, plug in the radio, and literally you don't know where the radio waves will take you any particular given time of day. That's part of the fun aspect of it. Just like fishing, you don't know if you'll catch a fish. It's the challenge of trying to make that contact and trying to ride those radio waves all around the world that is really the fun part.
Wow. Okay, so what's the furthest you've ever spoken to anyone?
Myself, I've only gone probably just like New York, Florida.
From right here in Topeka?
From here during one of our field day events and so forth, just around the United States.
Yeah,
both coasts and so forth. Hawaii, Alaska are doable sometimes also.
How about you, Brian?
Bangladesh, which is as far around the world as you can get.
Wow.
I've also spoken to the International Space Station, talked to astronauts on board there. They have ham radio.
No kidding.
Technology is very central to ham radio, and it helps to advance a lot of the different communications technologies out there. The technology that police cars use for tracking, a lot of that was developed by amateur radio.
So I saw the movie Gravity with Sandra Bullock, and she's talking to somebody. She's talking to one of somebody like you guys. It's pretty cool.
It is a lot of fun.
Was it you? Were you doing it?
No, it wasn't me in that
just
case.
Making sure. All right, so there are these organizations that you guys, that people can get involved with that kind of focus on different areas. Tell us about these organizations.
We have Skywarn and Aries in this area. There's also other organizations like Races that are in other areas of the country. they get together. Skywarn is mainly for watching the storms go through and so forth like that. And Aries does some of that also. We do a lot of that here in Topeka. But we also go around and help with bike races and running, 5K run walks, things like that all over the area and so forth. They do a lot of it in Kansas City. And keep track of the runners, make sure they make it to the finish. Everybody makes it to the finish line, and if there's any problems along the way, they can be warned ahead of time, get somebody out there to go pick up the bicyclist or get an ambulance out to them or whatever may be needed at the time.
Excellent. So how do you assist, what technically with that process, like these different organizations?
They usually have either handheld radios if they're close enough in, but they do have mobiles in their vehicles also. For instance, they usually put one person at the very tail end in their mobile riding behind the last rider in the race, and they're talking on their unit that's a mobile unit that's bolted into the car. It has their own car antenna on the outside that they can duck back to a base station and tell them, hey, we need help, we don't, where are we at, and so forth, so they know how long the race may take and things like that. So.
And a lot of times we'll actually use a radio like this one up here that has tracking built into it. So they can actually be watching a map and see where that last rider is at any given moment, so they don't even have to ask. Another thing that we do is we provide sag support, which is when riders are sagging behind, we can pick them up and bring them in. One of the challenges is if a rider calls in and says, I'm at 8th in Kansas and I need a ride, we didn't used to know where all of our different SAG vehicles were. Now we see them all on a map and boom, we can assign the closest one right away.
Very cool. Well, it's very interesting to find out about this stuff. I want you guys to come back and tell us more about the classes. There's a whole structure of ways you can learn about this stuff and take it into practical use into the real world. Thank you so much. Doug Dunton, Brian Short, we'll see you back here again because we want to learn more about this stuff. That's how you can get involved. Check it out on the screen, hamclass.org in Kansas City or kvarc.org in Topeka.